Redemption Crossing had been quiet long enough that folks started believing the desert had finally run out of trouble. They were wrong. It changed at high noon, when Wade Hollister rode in like a hard omen. Dust streamed behind his black gelding as if the earth itself didn't want him. A Winchester lay easy across his saddle, and two Colts rode his hips with the confidence of weapons that had already been used too many times. He was around 40, face cut by wind and years, eyes pale and flat, eyes that didn't look away from death because they'd made a living standing beside it. People recognized the breed, a hired killer dressed up as a traveler, so they shifted aside. They lowered their voices. They made room. Wade reined up in front of the Last Chance Saloon and threw his reins to the hitching rail. As he dismounted, his gaze snagged on the other horse tied there, an old bay gelding, 25 if it was a day, flanks scarred, muzzle gone gray, ribs showing the honest math of age. A horse that had worked too long, carried too much, and still stood anyway. Worthless, Wade muttered, and a crooked smile crept across his mouth. He flicked his cigarette at the bay. The old horse flinched, but he didn't shy, didn't spook. He only turned his head and watched Wade with dark, steady eyes, not panicked, not stupid. Aware. That look unsettled Wade Hollister. Men like him didn't like being seen too clearly, so he did what men like him always did when they felt exposed. He got cruel. "Move, you old piece of crowbait." Wade shoved the bay's shoulder hard. The horse stumbled sideways, chain clinking against the rail. Wade laughed and shoved him again, harder this time, until the horse bumped the post with a thud that traveled up wood and bone. Inside the saloon, tucked into the corner where the light didn't reach well, an old man sat with a glass he'd been nursing for near an hour. 70, maybe older, gray beard, sunburned skin, clothes that had seen better decades and had stopped asking for better ones. He'd been trying to disappear, trying to be retired. Then he heard it, the sound that snaps a horseman's spine straight no matter how old he is. A sharp, pained whinny, not fear, not complaint. Distress. The old man's hand froze on the glass. His jaw tightened like a knot being pulled. The bartender, Polk, noticed the change in him and tried to soothe it away. "Easy, old-timer," Polk said. "Probably just some fool being careless." But the old man was already pushing his chair back, rising slow as a gate in winter. Every joint protested. 70 years of hard living called their debts due. Still, he walked, steady, deliberate, toward the door. He stepped out onto the boardwalk and stopped. Wade had taken up a riding crop, not a whip, not the kind that would truly ruin a horse. Wade wasn't sloppy. He knew exactly how to hurt without crippling, how to leave pain that healed but shame that lingered. He struck the bay's flank again, just enough to draw a line that swelled angry and red. The horse tried to back away. The chain held. Wade glanced over and spotted the old man. "This your broke-down nag," he called, voice loud enough for the porch and half the street. "Or you just planning to cry over it?" The old man didn't answer right away. He walked down the steps slow and careful, eyes moving from Wade's face to the horse's side. He saw the fresh welt. He saw the crop had broken skin, tiny beads of blood in the hair. He saw his oldest friend standing there restrained, trembling, not from fear, but from a rage he could not yet spend. Something went cold in the old man's chest. Something he'd buried 30 years ago. Something he had prayed would stay buried. "I asked you a question," Wade said, and his hand drifted casual toward his Colt like it lived there. "That animal yours?" "Yes." The reply was quiet, too quiet, the kind of quiet that makes loud men blink. "That's Sergeant," the old man said. "He's mine, has been for 38 years." Wade barked a laugh. 38? Hell, that thing's older than most horses live. You ought to put it down, do it a favor. The old man stepped closer to Sergeant and laid a hand along the bay's neck. His fingers moved with the familiarity of a lifetime. Sergeant trembled under his palm, controlled anger, not panic. The horse had known violence, had been part of it more times than the old man could count. He was waiting for something. A signal. "Easy, boy," the old man murmured. "Easy." He examined the injury. It wasn't deep. It would heal. But it wasn't the wound that mattered. It was the rule. Nobody touched Sargent. Nobody. Wade watched with a grin. "You really gonna get misty-eyed over a horse? It's just an animal." "Just an animal," the old man repeated slowly, tasting the words like they were wrong on his tongue. Then he turned and faced Wade Hollister full on. "You know what you did," Wade sneered. "Smacked around some worn-out nag that should have been dead years ago." Wade's confidence was a thing you could smell. He'd killed 23 men, so the stories said. Quick draw, clean aim, cold conscience. He saw an elderly drifter and felt nothing but certainty. The old man's voice stayed low. "You made a mistake." The words didn't sound like a threat. They sounded like a verdict. Wade's smile faltered for a heartbeat, just a blink of unease, and then he pushed it away. "A mistake? That's supposed to scare me." "It's a fact," the old man said. "You hurt my partner, my oldest friend, the only living thing that's been with me through everything." He stepped half a pace closer. "Now you decide. You apologize and ride out, or you face what comes next." Wade laughed again, full and bright, like he'd been handed comedy in the street. "Old man, I don't know who you think you are." "My name," the old man said, "is Josiah Creek." The name hit the air like a match in dry grass. "And this is Sargent," he continued, hand still resting on the horse's neck. "And 30 years ago, we were the meanest thing moving across 3 territories." The boardwalk had gone quiet. Even the saloon doors seemed to hold their breath. Josiah kept speaking, and his voice never rose. It didn't need to. "We tracked over 200 men, brought in 147 alive, put down 53 who wouldn't come peaceful." He looked Wade in the eye. "And we never lost, not once." Wade's grin tightened. The name stirred old campfire tallies, stories swapped by men who wanted to feel brave. The bounty hunter who could shoot with either hand, the horse that could trample on command. Legends from the 1850s and 60s, back when the frontier settled things with iron and dirt. But that was decades ago. Ancient history. Wade's jaw worked. "I've heard those stories, don't believe half of 'em. And even if they're true, old man, that was 30 years back. You're old, the horse is old, I'm in my prime." He flexed his fingers near his Colt. "I've killed 23 men, so unless you want to be number 24, I suggest you walk away." Josiah looked down at Sargent. Sargent looked back. 38 years of partnership passed between them in a glance. No words needed. Sargent's ears flicked forward. "Ready?" Josiah lifted his eyes to Wade again. "Son, you just signed your own death warrant." The crowd had gathered now, folks spilling out of doorways, peering from windows, circling like they were afraid the air might ignite. Everyone was whispering odds. Everyone assumed the professional would win. Everyone except the old-timers. The ones who'd been around when Josiah Creek was more than a name. One man called from the porch, voice tight. "Wade, you might want to rethink this." Wade ignored him. He stared at Josiah and his voice sharpened like a blade. "I'm counting to 3. You can apologize and back off, or you can die. Your choice." Josiah didn't move. His hand wasn't even near the revolver on his hip, an old 1851 Navy model that looked more like a museum piece than a threat. That stillness made Wade think the old man was afraid. It wasn't fear. It was discipline. "One," Wade said. Sargent shifted, subtle, his hooves planted different, his body angled. Most people would have missed it. But that wasn't a horse repositioning. That was a fighter taking a stance. 2. Josiah's breathing slowed. Something deep in him clicked into place, like a door opening in a house nobody had entered for years. Wade's fingers flexed, ready to draw. 3. Josiah whistled. One short, sharp note. Sergeant exploded. The old bay moved like age had never touched him. His rear hooves lashed, chains snapping like rotten twine. Wood splintered. Iron clattered. Sergeant came up rearing, front legs high, and the crowd gasped as if they'd witnessed the impossible. Wade drew fast, professional fast. His Colt cleared leather in a blink, but his sights were on Josiah. He didn't see the half-ton of trained warhorse closing on him until it was too late. Sergeant came down hard. Not on Wade's skull, not on his spine. That would have ended it too clean. No. Sergeant struck Wade's gun hand. Precisely. Deliberately. Bone shattered. The Colt flew from Wade's grip and skittered 20 feet across the dirt. Wade screamed, stumbled, and Sergeant spun with a dancer's speed for something that big. Rear hooves drove into Wade's chest, measured force, not full, enough to launch him backward and crack ribs like dry sticks. Not enough to kill. Not yet. Wade hit the ground gasping, clutching his ruined hand, trying to breathe through a cage of broken bone. Josiah walked toward him. Only now did the old man's hand settle onto his revolver. I told you, Josiah said softly, you made a mistake. Wade tried to crawl away, panic pouring out of him. He reached with his left hand for his second Colt. He got it halfway out, and Sergeant's hoof came down on Wade's wrist, pinning it to the ground. Not crushing, not yet. Holding. Wade looked up into Sergeant's eyes and saw something that chilled him worse than pain. Intelligence. Calculation. This wasn't a dumb beast. This was a warrior. Please, Wade rasped. I didn't know, I swear I didn't know. Josiah stood over him, shadow falling like judgment. Didn't know what? Didn't know who you were, Wade choked. Didn't know what that horse is. Josiah shook his head once. If you'd known, you wouldn't have been kind, you'd have been cautious. He leaned down slightly, voice still calm. There's a difference between being good and being careful. From the crowd, a voice called, Josiah, that's enough. You made your point. Sheriff Landry pushed through, young and steady, hand near his gun but not eager. A fair man, too young to remember the old days, too decent to admire them. Landry stopped 10 feet away. That's murder, Josiah. I don't care who you used to be. Josiah looked down at Wade, broken, humiliated, hurting. 30 years ago he would have ended it without a blink. That was frontier math. You hurt a man's horse, you paid in blood. Clean, final. But 30 years had worn him down, made him tired, made him think about what death left behind. Josiah exhaled, long and heavy. Sergeant, he said quietly, release. The horse lifted his hoof and stepped back. Wade whimpered, clutching his wrist and ribs. Josiah pointed toward the street. Get up, get on your horse, ride out, and if I ever see you again, if you come near me or Sergeant, then we finish what you started, understand? Wade nodded so hard it looked like his neck might break. He staggered to his black gelding, mounted one-handed, face white with agony, and kicked the horse into a gallop. He was gone in seconds. The crowd drifted away, buzzing like flies around a fresh wound. Sheriff Landry stayed. That was mercy, Landry said. Old Josiah Creek wouldn't have shown mercy. Josiah's gaze didn't lift from Sergeant. Old Josiah Creek has been dead for 30 years, he replied. This is just a man trying to finish his days in peace. But as he ran his hands over Sergeant's neck, checking for real damage, both of them knew the truth. Old Josiah Creek wasn't dead. He was sleeping. And Wade Hollister had just kicked the door open. Sergeant stood calm, breathing steady. 38 years. They survived worse than a riding crop and a bully's pride. You did good, Josiah whispered, voice thick, just like old times. Sergeant nudged his shoulder, gentle as a promise. Sheriff Landry approached carefully. "We need to talk." "About what?" "About why you're really here," Landry said. "You've been in my town 3 weeks. Quiet, keeping to yourself, that ain't passing through." Josiah was silent a moment. Then he spoke like he was finally tired of carrying it alone. "I'm dying," he said. "Doctor in Santa Fe gave me 6 months, maybe less. Cancer in my lungs." He tapped his chest lightly. "All those years breathing gunsmoke, I guess the bill came due." Landry's expression softened. "I'm sorry I didn't." "Nobody does," Josiah cut in. "Not cruel, just firm. And I'd prefer it stays that way." He stroked Sargent's neck. "When I go, I've arranged for Sargent to live out at Clara's ranch outside town. She'll take him. Let him stand in sun, eat grass, be a horse." His eyes stayed on Sargent as he spoke, like he couldn't bear saying it to anyone else. "He's earned that." Landry nodded slowly. "And if Wade comes back with friends?" Josiah's mouth tightened. "Then Sargent and I handle it like we always have." "You can't fight a gang," Landry argued. "Not at your age, not with—" He gestured vaguely at Josiah's chest. Josiah gave a faint, almost amused exhale. "Sheriff, I've been dying since the day I was born. I'm just moving faster now." He looked Landry in the eye. "If I'm going out on my terms, protecting what's mine." That evening, in a rented room above the general store, Josiah sat with a small lamp and cleaned his old Navy Colt. The gun was antique, but his hands treated it like holy scripture. Every part slid smooth. He'd fired it so many times he knew its quirks like he knew Sargent's breathing, how it pulled a hair right at distance, how the trigger broke light as a whisper. A knock sounded. "It's open." Clara stepped in, around 50, weathered hands, kind eyes that had seen too many broken animals and still chose tenderness. "I heard," she said simply. "News travels," Josiah replied. "Especially when a legend steps out of the shadows," she said, taking the only chair. "You okay?" she asked. "I'm fine," Josiah said. "Sergeant's fine, the other fellow less so." Clara's mouth twitched. "They say you broke his hand, cracked his ribs, and sent him running." "He hurt Sargent," Josiah answered. "I responded accordingly." "Accordingly," Clara repeated with a dry smile. "That's a fancy word for a man who spent 40 years shooting people." Josiah holstered the Colt. "Retirement teaches you vocabulary. Doctors love big words." Clara's humor faded a little. "You worried about me taking Sargent when you're gone." "Worried," she said. "No, honored." Then she hesitated. "But Josiah, that horse loves you. When you die, he's going to grieve. Horses do that, especially ones like him." Josiah's eyes lowered. "I know. And I don't know if he'll recover from losing you." Josiah stared at the floor for a long moment. "What choice do I have?" he asked quietly. "I can't take him with me, and I can't put him down while he's still got breath and strength. That wouldn't be right." "You could have ended it years ago," Clara said gently. "Spared him this." "Spared him what?" Josiah asked. "Living, being loved, having purpose." He shook his head. "No, every day he breathes is a gift to both of us, and when I'm gone he'll still have days, maybe fewer, maybe harder, but they'll still matter." Clara stood and laid a hand on his shoulder. "You're a better man than the stories say." "Stories only ever tell half," Josiah murmured. 3 quiet days followed, days of short rides into the desert. Not far, just enough to feel wind, to see horizon, to remember what it was like to be dangerous and alive. On the 4th day, Wade Hollister returned. And he didn't come alone. 5 riders flanked him, hard men, professional killers by their posture alone. Wade's right hand was splinted and bandaged. Bruises had yellowed along his face, but his eyes were worse than bruises. Humiliation turned to hunger. They found Josiah at the stable, brushing Sargent down after a morning ride. Josiah looked up, saw 6 men, and sighed like a man watching a storm arrive that he'd already predicted. "Figured you'd come back," he said. "Didn't think you'd need company." Wade dismounted carefully, ribs still tender. "That's right," he snapped. "Company, professional company." He pointed to a scarred man with dead eyes. "Cutter Dobbs, 16 kills." Then another, Ramon Velasco, 23. Josiah cut him off, bored. "I don't care about your friend's numbers. What do you want?" Wade's voice rose. "You humiliated me, broke my hand, let your animal attack me like a trained dog. Now I want payback." He pointed at Sargent. "I want that horse dead." He pointed at Josiah. "I want you dead." He swept a hand at the town like he wanted witnesses. "And I want everyone to see what happens when someone crosses Wade Hollister." Josiah set the brush down slowly. He patted Sargent's flank. The horse's ears flattened, battle-ready. "So you brought 6 armed men to kill a dying old man and his horse," Josiah said. "Does that make you feel strong?" Wade's lip curled. "Makes me feel satisfied." He drew a Colt with his left hand, awkward but workable. "Any last words?" Josiah's eyes moved across the men, reading them like a map. Cutter, fast but reckless. Ramon, careful but slow. The others, competent, nothing special. 6 men. Bad odds. But Josiah had faced worse than odds. "Yeah," he said, "last words." His hand dropped to his Colt. "You should have brought more." Then the world snapped into violence. Josiah drew, 70 years old, lungs failing, but muscle memory was a god that didn't forget. The Navy Colt came up smooth and steady. A shot cracked. Cutter took the round in the shoulder and spun down hard. Sargent reared, front hooves slamming onto Ramon's horse's head and neck, just enough to spook it. Ramon went flying, hit the ground with a sick thud, and suddenly 6 against 1 became 4 against 1. Still bad. Just less hopeless. Bullets ripped splinters from wood as Josiah rolled left. His back screamed. His lungs burned like they were full of fire. Training overrode pain the way it always had. He came up behind a water trough and fired twice. One of the men, a young one named Terry, clutched his leg and went down, howling. 3 against 1. Plus Sargent. And Sargent was not merely a horse. He was a whirlwind, kicking, biting, rearing, shifting like he'd studied gunmen his whole life because he had. Wade's men tried to line a shot, but Sargent never stopped moving. He used walls, posts, angles, terrain like a soldier. Wade fired. The bullet grazed Josiah's shoulder shallow, but sharp enough to flash bright pain. First blood. Josiah fired back and missed. Wade had learned to move since last time. He was adapting, and that made him dangerous in a new way. "Spread out," Wade shouted. "Flank him." 2 men split, brothers, Kyle and Dean, taking positions to crossfire. It was good work. It would have ended most men. But Josiah and Sargent didn't need words. They didn't need plans spoken aloud. Their partnership lived in instinct. Sargent charged Kyle. Kyle tried to shoot. He didn't get the time. Hooves drove him into the stable wall with a crash that knocked breath and fight out of him. That left Dean and Wade. 2 against 1. Josiah's Colt clicked empty. Age had stolen his perfect counting. Once he tracked every round like a prayer, not anymore. Dean saw the advantage and raised his rifle, smiling. Sargent hit him from behind like thunder. Dean went face first into the dirt. The rifle flew away. Dean didn't rise. And then there was only Wade, standing alone, gun in his left hand, facing an old man reloading and an old horse that fought like a demon. The tables had flipped so hard it felt unreal. "You can surrender," Josiah said, feeding fresh rounds into the cylinder. His hands shook slightly, age, adrenaline, or cancer, maybe all 3. "I'll let Sheriff Landry handle you, clean, legal." Wade's voice cracked, fear sneaking through pride. Or what? Josiah's eyes went flat again, older than the desert. Or you draw, and Sergeant and I finish it the way we finished 53 men who wouldn't come peaceful. He nodded toward Wade's fallen crew. Choice is yours, same as I gave you before. Wade looked at his men. 5 down, some bleeding, some broken, all beaten. He looked at Josiah, an old man who shouldn't have been capable of any of this. Then he looked at Sergeant, an animal that defied everything he believed about animals. And Wade Hollister made the only smart choice he'd made in days. He dropped his gun and raised his hands. Surrender. Sheriff Landry arrived minutes later with deputies, stopping short at the site. Bodies in the dirt, weapons scattered, Josiah standing steady, Sergeant beside him breathing hard but unhurt. Landry stared. Jesus Christ, Josiah, what happened? They came looking for trouble, Josiah said. They found it. Landry's deputies moved in, cuffing the survivors, hauling them toward jail. Assault, attempted murder, disturbing the peace. Whatever the judge decided, those men wouldn't be riding free for a long time. After they were gone, Clara stepped out from where she'd been watching, face pale. You should be dead, she said bluntly. 6 men, professional killers. Josiah checked Sergeant, just scrapes and knocks, nothing that wouldn't heal. Probably, he admitted. But Sergeant and I, we've got an agreement. He rested his forehead briefly against the horse's neck. We protect each other. That night Josiah couldn't sleep. Adrenaline crashed into pain. His wounds throbbed. The cancer gnawed from inside. He lay staring at the ceiling, thinking about endings, about how every fight now could be his last. Near midnight, he got up and went down to the stable. Sergeant was awake. The horse nickered softly as Josiah slipped into the stall and sat in the hay beside him. We can't keep doing this, boy, Josiah whispered. I'm dying, you're old. We got lucky today. Sergeant lowered his head and rested it against Josiah's shoulder. Heavy, comforting, real. I don't want you to die when I do, Josiah said. I want you to live, rest, sun, grass, all of it. His voice cracked, and he didn't bother hiding it. But I don't want to leave you either. Sergeant simply breathed, warm breath in cold air, like a presence saying, I'm here, I'm here, I'm here. 2 weeks after that fight, Josiah's health fell fast. The cancer spread like it had been waiting for the excuse. The violence, the stress, the strain had pushed his body past whatever fragile line it still had. He didn't tell the town. He didn't want pity. He spent every day with Sergeant. Writing, brushing, talking. Making memories to carry into whatever came next. Clara visited daily, bringing food, looking at him with that stubborn kindness. You should be in a hospital, she told him. And leave Sergeant, Josiah said. No. He's going to watch you die, Clara whispered. That'll break him. Maybe, Josiah said. But I'd rather he sees me go than wakes up and I'm just gone. He deserves to know I didn't abandon him. One morning Josiah couldn't rise from bed, too weak, too much pain. Clara found him and sent for the doctor, but everyone in that room knew what it meant. They moved Josiah into the stable and set a cot inside Sergeant's stall so horse and man could be together at the end. Sergeant stood over him like a guard, barely eating, barely sleeping. Last mission. Sheriff Landry came, hat in hand, voice rough. Heard you're not doing well. Dying, Josiah said. Call it what it is. He swallowed, then forced the words out. I need a promise. When I'm gone, Sergeant goes to Clara. But if he won't eat, if he won't recover, if he's